So he confesses that that's what he did. That's what happened. He acted alone. He took somebody's life. Yet it doesn't result in a conviction. It doesn't result in a life sentence or the death penalty. It results in what's up, everybody? Natalee Holloway took the world by storm almost 20 years ago, and I was a kid, so I wasn't really in it like a lot of you were, and this is kind of the crime of the century for a lot of people. So when I got questions about a confession finally happening and some closure finally happening, but why isn't he being punished for it? I at first was thinking I'm not just going to get on here and read headlines of, oh, he confessed and this is what happened and this is how he explained what happened to her and why they could never find her. But then I was sent the plea agreement and I actually thought it was very interesting. Read some other reports of some laws in Aruba, which I found interesting. And so it turned into a very interesting legal question. How can you have a confession without a conviction of a crime like this, where in the United States, there is no statute of limitations when you commit the ultimate crime, which was committed in this case and confessed to in open court? And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to read the plea agreement. We're going to talk about some differences in laws. I'm going to ask you what you think as far as these differences in laws go. We'll talk about whether or not something can happen in the future potentially. And when I say I was a kid, it's kind of wild to hear that. I think she and I are very similarly aged. I think it was like her 37th birthday recently, or is happening recently, and my 36th birthday happened recently. So when you're a kid and you just don't think about that stuff, that's the mindset she was in when all of this happened to her on a trip to Aruba, where she met Vandersloot, unfortunately. So we are going to bring up the plea agreement today, and we're going to focus on why you can make these agreements. We've read a few plea agreements in the past. And again, this is a federal plea agreement. I read one, I think it was Murdoch's maybe, with my dad. And we talked about how you can agree to a lot of different things. And the court approves the plea agreement, and you move on and make a decision and go to prison and pay the fines and whatever it is that you agree to. But you can put a lot more than I plead guilty to in this situation: wire fraud, extortion, things like that, but not the ultimate crime for which he confesses to in front of Natalee Holloway's parents. So to look at this plea agreement real quick, he is pleading guilty to the indictment, consenting to forfeiture, consenting to pay restitution, pay Natalee Holloway's family back $25,100, waive rights to appeal, and things like that. We'll talk about the nature and factual basis for the extortion and wire fraud claims. But most of the video is going to be on the confession. So it goes through the maximum punishment, extortion, wire fraud, and then a factual basis. So I'm just going to summarize this so we don't read the entire 23-page document here. A couple years after Natalee Holloway disappeared in March of 2010, Vandersloot reaches out to her family. I mean, it literally took the nation by storm. Gabby Petito on steroids, basically. And he said that for information about where their daughter's body is, if they paid him $250,000, he would give them that information. Basically, the definition of extortion. They agree to a $25,000 deposit, and then they would pay the rest once they saw her body or got information or found her. So the $100 comes in because there was a wire transfer fee that the family paid of $100. And then they actually did pay him $25,000. And then he left Aruba and went to, I believe, Peru, who eventually agreed to extradite him on the extortion and wire fraud charges here in federal court, for which he's pleading guilty to now. So that was the factual basis for the charges in which he's pleading to. And the sentence here that he agrees to, or both sides agree to, I should say, is 240 months or 20 years with credit for time served in prison. He is going to have supervised release for 3 years following prison. He is going to pay restitution of $25,100. he's going to comply with forfeiture provisions, and he'll pay a special assessment of $200. We talked about that in the last one with my dad, the plea agreement that we did, so we don't have to go into further detail. So this basically encompasses the agreement between the U.S. Attorney's Office and Vandersloot on these extortion and wire fraud charges. Now, the extortion and wire fraud, because it was initiated here in the United States, the Holloways were here in the United States, there's a nexus to prosecute this crime in the United States. Problem is, by the way, he's going to be serving his sentence in Peru, I guess, which is interesting. The problem with the crime of taking Natalee Holloway's life is it did not happen in the United States. And therefore, they could not charge him with that crime in the United States. It happened in Aruba. And one of the major issues in this entire process is that the statute of limitations on that crime is 12 years in Aruba. At least that's what everybody's understanding seems to be and what the research shows. However, the prosecutors in Aruba said at this point, it's still under investigation and they're still not sure if and what they can do at this point. So they haven't completely closed the book on it. Sometimes laws are changed, statutes are extended, exceptions are made, and we'll see if this turns into the exception type of case. It seems like one with enough interest and push behind it that might be the case, but we'll see. So he's going to cooperate with the wire fraud and extortion, give information on that. But the very interesting part of this plea agreement comes with the Natalee Holloway cooperation. This is what Vandersloot agrees to. The defendant will honestly and completely assist law enforcement agencies concerning the circumstances of Natalee Holloway's disappearance on May 29th, 2005. The defendant will be fully debriefed by personnel of the U.S. Attorney's Office, representatives of the FBI, and others may be determined by the U.S. Attorney. The defendant will provide all information and evidence within his knowledge or control concerning Natalee Holloway's disappearance. All such information will be full, complete, accurate, and truthful. The defendant understands and agrees that Elizabeth Ann Holloway and Dave Holloway, Natalee Holloway's parents, will be allowed to hear the defendant's debrief with representatives of the U.S. Attorney's Office and FBI. If the United States determines that it is necessary, the defendant will submit to a polygraph examination administered by an agent of the United States following his debrief. Not that uncommon, as my dad mentioned again in the Murdoch plea agreement. The defendant further understands and agrees that following this debrief, the United States, in consultation with Elizabeth Ann Holloway, will make a determination regarding the completeness, accuracy, and truthfulness of the information and evidence provided by the defendant regarding Natalee Holloway. Said determination shall be final and conclusive. So Natalee Holloway's mom has final say. Is it enough? Is it full? Is it complete? Is it true? And if she says no, well, guess what? This fee agreement could be null and void. The defendant understands and agrees that should the results of the polygraph examination be unsatisfactory to the United States or Natalee Holloway's mom, and they determine that the information provided by the defendant was not complete, accurate, or truthful, this plea agreement will be null and void. Now, what does the United States agree in return for this complete and truthful confession, basically, that Vandersloot's going to give regarding what happened to Natalee Holloway? Well, they agree that pursuant to 1B18 of the sentencing guidelines, the U.S. attorney will not use information or evidence provided by the defendant during the defendant's assistance in the investigation against him. Therefore, even if we could find some kind of nexus to prove the case in the United States that he confesses to as a result of this plea agreement, that paragraph would make it null and void, and he basically gets immunity for whatever he confesses to in the debrief and discussions with the U.S. Attorney's Office, FBI, Holloway's parents, polygraph, all of that. The United States will recommend 240 months, and it will run concurrently with previously imposed sentences that the defendant is currently serving in Peru. The United States will acknowledge the defendant's truthfulness during his debrief with representatives from the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office to the court at the time of sentencing, noting that the defendant's truthfulness will provide closure to the Holloway family. So, at this point, and then the rest of it goes through a lot of what he's waiving, the sentencing guidelines, agreement binding on the court, which we don't have to necessarily dig into today. Now, I will give a PG version in case anybody has not been caught up to speed on what he says happened and he did to Natalee Holloway and some of the quotes that have come afterwards from her family and others. First, he says that, he was basically there, high schooler, similar age to Natalee Holloway. They meet, they hang out, they like each other, they're kissing on the beach. She starts resisting, kicks him in the groin, and he kicks her in the head. And that may have been the end right there, but he wasn't sure. So he finished the job with a cinder block and took her body out waist deep in the water, I think, or knee deep in the water. And that's how he disposed of the body. Now, her parents agree and basically have come out and given quotes that he probably did act alone in committing the crime. However, they still think that maybe other people could have helped him with disposal of the body. We'll see what the results of the polygraph test are when they ask questions like that. My guess is they'll dig into things like that to try to get complete closure and make sure that her body is not able to be found. So he confesses that that's what he did. That's what happened. He acted alone. He took somebody's life. Yet it doesn't result in a conviction. It doesn't result in a life sentence or the death penalty. It results in nothing in connection with that crime. Now, the result of this plea agreement is 240 months or 20 years in prison. That's a long time, but he's not that old. So he will presumably get out one day if this is the only charge there's other concurrent charges that they've talked about. I don't know what those are, but just on the extortion and the wire fraud, he will get out of prison one day. And he will be a confessed killer the day he gets out of prison. That to me is mind-boggling that can happen in 2023. Yet, if the 12-year statute of limitations for these charges in Aruba holds up, that's exactly what will happen. If not, and if he becomes an exception, they could try the case in Aruba, potentially convict him, and he can get a much longer sentence in Aruba. But as far as the United States is concerned, all they could really do is 20 years based on this extortion and wire fraud charge. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any other questions about the legal angle of it. I don't know all of the reports. I don't know every detail of her disappearance or what happened and things like that. I am just focused on the plea agreement, the bargain for exchange, why he got immunity, why he can't be prosecuted for taking her life in the United States. Now we know because of this plea agreement. Why can he not be prosecuted for taking her life in Aruba? We know because of the statute of limitations. Will that change? We will see. Will this plea agreement become null and void? And then therefore they can use the details he confessed to against him potentially. If it's null and void based on the mom thinking it's not full, accurate, complete, based on the polygraph results, we'll see, because that's an option as well. But I can't wait to see what your questions are in the comments. Hit that like button if you guys enjoyed this video and want further videos like this. I appreciate you joining me. Until next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who might be interested here on YouTube. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, at Lawyer You Know. But on Instagram, we are still at Tragos Law. So look us up on there. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. Of course, all of these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.